Oftentimes, when vintage PC enthusiasts talk about their childhood systems, you'll hear certain terms thrown around like DOS, 8086, IBM clone, ISA, Windows 9X, things like that. But I don't think as many people still interested in this hobby can or will tell you that they grew up on something like a Pentium 4 or an AMD Athlon. The fact is that this early-ish to mid-2000s era of PC hardware is still largely not considered or recognized as being vintage, despite its near 20 years of existence now, in some cases over 20 years too. Being 26, I've used a variety of hardware, but I spent the majority of my pure youthful years on a Socket-A desktop and a Core Duo, not Core 2 Duo laptop. For this reason, I've always been super fond of Athlon and Athlon XP systems. These are the very systems that I used to spend countless hours playing UT 2003, browsing the web, making LEGO animation videos, emulating N64 games, the list goes on. That's why when I recently acquired a specific motherboard from a bunch of old PCs and PC hardware that my girlfriend's uncle was disposing of, I got a fun idea to finally do something that felt interesting for me with vintage PC hardware, beyond just fixing it up and then not really knowing what to do with it afterwards. Coming back to the topic of Socket-A systems though, it should be no surprise that I've owned tons and tons of Socket-A systems. My first system ever was a Duron 1.2 on a VIA KT133 chipset. Over the years though, I've gathered the highest of high-end and the lowest of low-end, and honestly, I wasn't happy with either of them. The Enforce boards are nice because they're super high-end, but I never found them to be particularly stable. I'm looking at you, MSI and ECS. And obviously the low-end stuff is not very fun unless you enjoy torturing it with hardware mods and overclocking. At the end of the day, even when I had managed to finally find a decent enough, somewhat stable Enforce Socket-A system, I wasn't happy with it. Something just didn't feel right, and I never really ended up using it despite how cool it was and how proud I was of this build, so I never really hung on to my Socket-A boards. At some point later in my childhood, that Duron system had seemingly bit the dust, though later on I would figure out that this was not actually the case. Either way, I was left with no PC for quite a while, and during this time my dad begrudgingly let me use his Athlon XP 1800 Plus system. Thank you, Dad. He had built this system just to play GTA Vice City and Unreal Tournament 2004 several years prior. I did get to use this PC occasionally in the past though, so it's not like this was my first time using a faster Socket-A system with DDR memory, but it was still kinda cool nonetheless. It was still faster than my own system. Being the stupid 10-year-old that I was, I looked up PSP hacks online, and well, one thing led to another, and eventually Dad had a bunch of viruses on his PC. So not long after that event happened, my uncle came by our house with an old beige PC in his car. He was giving me his old PC he had built at the same time my dad was building his system. So once again, I would finally have my own PC. The system in question was an Asus A7V8X-X with an Athlon XP 2800 Plus. I would actually spend many years using this system regularly from around 2007 until about late 2011. So now, coming back to the present with those free PCs and PC hardware I got, you can imagine my excitement when in the pile of all that already neat stuff I had been given, I saw that familiar looking gold PCB motherboard. There it was, the Asus A7V8X-X. Not the exact one my uncle had given me, but still, it's at least the exact same model. I'm sure you're thinking that I'm here to tell you, hey, I rebuilt that exact same PC my uncle had given me back in '07. However, you're wrong. This is where the plot kind of twists. So that A7V8X-X is actually very similar to the MSI KT4V that my dad had in his system, and in fact they share the same VIA KT400 chipset. I also happen to have a backup of my dad's PC that we took in about 2009. Everything still seemed to be intact. Furthermore, we have the exact same CPU from my dad's system lying around, the exact same SB0010 sound card, the exact same XFX FX5600 GPU, and we also have that Thermaltake Silent Boost from the system my uncle gave me. So with this in mind, I've set out to try and not rebuild a specific PC, but rather a fun, upgraded version of both my dad's PC and the PC my uncle had given to me. For me, this would be my ultimate Socket-A system that I think I've been wanting this whole time. This is a system that I would actually feel connected to and would really enjoy using. So now I have to wonder, what exactly was in those PCs? Well, my dad's PC had the MSI motherboard, the KT4V, the Athlon XP 1800 Plus. He had 2.5 gigs of some mismatched DDR RAM, all running at presumably 266 megahertz. He had a 200 gigabyte Maxtor hard drive from 2006 that I don't know the model of. Also don't know what PSU he had, but I know for sure it was cheap garbage. The XFX GeForce FX 5600, as I said, the SB0010, and a stock Athlon XP CPU cooler. And as for the PC my uncle gave me, well, yeah, it had the A7 V8X-X, the Athlon XP 2800 Plus, 1 gig of also mismatched DDR RAM running at 333 megahertz, I believe, 250 gigabyte Samsung spin point of some sort, don't remember the model, also another junk PSU of questionable origin, an MSI GeForce FX 5700 LE. Interestingly enough, this one was 256 megabytes of DDR RAM with a 128-bit membus, despite being an LE. It had some sort of sound blaster, I don't remember the model, and it had that Thermaltake silent boost I told you about. For the record, I'm going to be ignoring the cases. I have no idea what either of the cases were called. They were just some random, cheap, generic beige case. So we'll just use whatever case I can find from the pile of stuff my girlfriend's uncle gave to me. Yeah, this seems pretty nice. Another thing to note is that my dad's system was actually set up to dump and burn Wii and Xbox 360 DVDs. Sadly, the original optical drives with their special firmware flash to them are long gone, and I do not feel like spending hundreds on another pair of these drives, so we'll just have to use whatever optical drives I have lying around. So with all that out of the way, I have a pretty clear idea of what my ultimate socket A system would look like. Some of these components I have lying around, and some of them I'm going to have to try and hunt down myself, which will be fun. It will look a little something like this though. We're going to keep the Asus motherboard because it's much better than the MSI board that my dad had. We're going to use an AMD Athlon XP 3200 Plus because I have one lying around and it's also the fastest socket A CPU, so why the hell not. We'll put in 2 gigs of DDR RAM running at 400 megahertz. I think this is a very healthy amount of RAM for XP. We're going to try and use the exact Maxtor hard drive from my dad's old system. Any 350 watt or higher PSU from around the time should be fine, just as long as it's something name brand. We're going to actually use a GeForce FX 5600 Ultra, I hope. Or maybe we could do a GeForce FX 5700. These GeForce FX GPUs are very hard to come by, and even the 5700 commands somewhat of a premium unless you can kind of find one on a slightly good deal. We're going to use the exact SB0010 for my dad's system, and the exact Thermaltake Silent Boost for my uncle's system. Oh, and let's not forget that case that I showed you earlier. We're going to use that too, even though it's not from anything I'm familiar with. And so here's our rig. So what exactly is going on in here, and what's changed from the plan and what's remained with the plan? You can probably tell there's a immediate outlier in the plan here, but otherwise it's basically how I imagined it would be. And honestly, as a matter of fact, this is a build that's been going on for months at this point, honestly since February of this year. It's just taken a lot of time to really get it to a point to where I'm actually happy with it, and I'm not really going to touch it anymore. Now here's something that's going to look familiar to recent viewers of the channel. This is the RAM from the CS Office PC that I could not get working in it. And while I've basically rectified the RAM problem in that PC somehow, I don't know how, I managed to acquire even faster RAM for dirt cheap recently for that system. So it only made sense to take all the mismatched RAM that was in there and throw this stuff in here, and it works. So we've got 2 of these sticks at 2 gigs. Mem tested and everything, they work, and yeah. The power supply is a 430 watt Seasonic from around the same time period as the rest of this stuff. I call it the Squeal Sonic because it squeals like crazy. I don't know why, but it's still working very well, so there we go. Obviously we have our Thermaltake Silent Boost. I've showed that many times. The Sound Blaster tucked away right there. Exact one from my dad's PC. Still have it after all these years. This is an iOmega USB card. I got this from one of the other PCs and that big thing that my girlfriend's uncle gave to me. My dad actually had a USB, whatever they're called, that plugs into the motherboard, and then it's a cable and then it just runs back here. So this is kind of my attempt at imitating that. Now I'm going to get you guys in on the side here. Sorry if this is looking weird. The hard drive is unfortunately not the one from my dad's PC. I was pretty certain that I gave it to a very close friend of mine when we traded a bunch of stuff several years ago, or I actually probably sold it, but
Unfortunately, all I have is the drive from a different uncle. Yes, my dad and a different uncle of mine had the exact same Maxter hard drive. It's just the one from the other uncle is 250 gigabytes. So, it's close enough. It's the exact same drive, just higher capacity. Let's address the elephant in the room, and that is this Quadro card. Long story short, I keep getting fucked every time I try to get a GeForce FX card. Don't ask why, because I don't know why. But I'm either getting my orders canceled or they're turning up dead and I'm losing money. So this was a new old stock card, and I've actually had this for a very long time, almost a year. It is based on the FX 5700 Ultra. It has the Ultra core, even though it is a Quadro card. Basically what I did is I unlocked it, let's say. I flashed custom clock speeds to the core and the RAM. So the core went from 400 to 475, which is, again, what the 5700 Ultra uses. The RAM, on the other hand, though, is just kind of cheap GDDR stuff, so it only runs at 350 megahertz. From the factory it's 325, but it's actually rated, the data sheets for these chips show 350, so you can very easily run them at 350. I put some cooling on them. I didn't expect these things to be that big. It's what I have for now. I do have an FX 5900 coming. Not quite the GPU that I wanted, but I got an offer that I couldn't turn down, and so I don't even know if it's gonna work. Probably not, because I can't get one of these cards that seems to work. But this video has been dragging on for like 3 weeks now, and I just want to get it done. So for all intents and purposes, imagine this is like some sort of crazy GeForce FX 5700. So yeah, that's what we're gonna think of this as for now. It's been in here for a while, so nothing's really gonna change, but it is a decent card, and I've gone ahead and repasted it and everything, and yeah. As I mentioned, the optical drives are random crap. These were actually already in this case, and they seem to work. The floppy disk drive, sadly, I don't have the original from my dad's PC. It sounded really cool.
I love that sound.
As you can tell, I was really infatuated with the sound of that thing. And then real quick, we have cooling. I decided to try and max out the cooling on this thing just because I could. I had the stuff flying around. So we have an exhaust fan that's taking stuff from kind of in around here and sucking it up out through here. And then to help keep this Athlon XP 3200 Plus cool, we have a Vantex Silence, Stealth, whatever. I have had this for quite a few years. It's a very good fan. It's nice and quiet. And we have actually put a cooler. This, like, I think this is the South Bridge. I'm caught lacking here. I don't remember if these are South Bridges or if South Bridge and North Bridge was only a term that got coined in later Intel motherboards, but I'm pretty sure that's the South Bridge, because there's our chipset right there. But I have a little heatsink, actually the same kind that's on the Quadro FX 1000, just because that was getting really hot. And I know that that's normal, but you know, why not? It might be considered rice, but it does its job. It keeps it cooler. And since the chipset is technically being overclocked here, even though it is somewhat rated to run at 400 megahertz, I decided to get some active cooling going on there. It's definitely not a good fan. It's very old, but it works. New thermal compound and a fan mounted there that runs off this little janky header setup I've got going on. Keeps the chipset very cool and running good. Not that it was having problems before, but you know, it looks cool. You know, it makes it look that much more powerful. So now that I've assembled this system, what's next? Nothing. I'm just gonna start using it. The point of this video is not to show you, whoa, look at my super sick socket A system with all these cool parts. For sure it does have some cool parts, but by no means is it a super fast system, and as you could tell, I never intended it to be that way.
In all actuality, the purpose of this video is to try and show you that you really don't need to go all out and buy the craziest of crazy parts to try and be once again reunited with hardware that takes you back to happier times. Chasing after nostalgia is quite a common thing these days, and I'm no exception to that pastime. However, what I've come to realize is that, much like someone who collects old toys or vinyl records, for example, what I enjoy most about this is having some form of tangible way to reconnect with my very fond memories. I could, and I have built very fancy vintage PCs, like the CS Office PC for example, to run old software and games that I remember using all the time as a kid. But each and every time, it just wasn't the same as I remembered it. Running the software in a more familiar environment with parts that I remember very well and with the applications behaving very similarly to how I remember them behaving, it really goes and creates a more tangible and interactive way for me to go revisit these fond memories. Hopefully some of that made some sense, but what I'm trying to say basically is, if you want to revisit your own technological memories, I feel like the most effective and fun way to do so is by trying to stick to exactly what you remembered using. I say exactly, but really, it doesn't have to be one-to-one. For example, if there are some aspects of it that make you angry thinking about it, like in my case, the horrible GeForce FX 5600 GPU, you can always go out and try and source a maybe more improved part. Similar, but improved. But there's something really comforting and fulfilling about once again being able to both use and hold some of these very parts that I was using and tinkering with some 14 years ago now. So how can I close out this video? I jumped around between two topics in this video. The first topic was showing and building my ultimate vintage PC, which happens to be a socket A based system, as that's what I grew up with. And the second topic was a mini opinionated rant about how I think nostalgia is something best experienced as closely to how you remember it as possible. Oftentimes when people make these nostalgia builds, they go for the most high spec and crazy parts from the time period. And by all means, it looks super cool and I'm absolutely, most certainly jealous. But I think most of us, including the people that make these systems, can't actually relate to that. To us, our nostalgia is probably more like using low to mid-range parts and spending lots and lots of time trying to tweak every game so that it can run well while still looking good enough. And so with that, I challenge you to go out and make your own ultimate nostalgia build. One that's inspired by that one PC you used from simpler times. Go on, re-experience the ups and downs of the finicky and potentially slow hardware. I think you'd be surprised at just how amusing it is to go back and really re-experience all that stuff exactly how you experienced it all that time ago. Thanks for watching as always, and stay tuned for more.
Okay, fine, you can look. That's me. I'm gonna change the background. Quite embarrassing. Although it isn't my computer, so I guess I should leave it alone.